"Give me blood, I will give you freedom" was the clarion call of Netaji. Subhas Chandra Bose was born to Prabhavati Bose and Janakinath Bose on 23 January 1897 in Cuttack to Janakinath Bose and Prabhavati Devi, in what is today the state of Odisha in India, but was then the Orissa division of Bengal province in British India. His parents, Prabhavati, the anchor of family life, had her first child at age 14 and 13 children thereafter. Subhas was the ninth child and the sixth son. Janakinath, a successful lawyer and government pleader, was loyal to the government of British India and scrupulous about matters of language and the law. A self-made man from the rural outskirts of Calcutta, he had remained in touch with his roots, returning annually to his village during the Puja holidays. Eager to join his five school-going older brothers, Subhas entered the Baptist Mission's Protestant European School in Cuttack in January 1902. English was the medium of all instruction in the school, the majority of the students being European or Anglo-Indians of mixed British and Indian ancestry. Subhas Chandra Bose was a brilliant student. He passed his BA in philosophy from the Presidency College in Calcutta. He was deeply influenced by Swami Vivekananda's teachings and was known for his patriotic zeal as a student. In an incident where Bose beat up his professor, E.F. Orton, for his racist remarks, brought him notoriety as a rebel Indian in eyes of the government. His father wanted Netaji to become a civil servant and therefore sent him to England to appear for the Indian Civil Service examination. Bose was placed fourth with highest marks in English. But his urge for participating in the freedom movement was intense, and in April 1921, he resigned from the coveted Indian Civil Service and came back to India. In December 1921, Bose was arrested and imprisoned for organizing a boycott of the celebrations to mark the Prince of Wales' visit to India. During his stay in Berlin, he met and fell in love with Emily Schenkel, who was of Austrian origin. Bose and Emily were married in 1937 in a secret Hindu ceremony, and Emily gave birth to a daughter Anita in 1942. Shortly after the birth of their daughter, Bose left Germany in 1943 to come back to India. Bose joined the non-cooperation movement started by Mohandas K. Gandhi, who had made the Indian National Congress a powerful non-violent organization. Bose was advised by Gandhi to work under Chitta Ranjan Das, a politician in Bengal. There Bose became a youth educator, journalist, and commandant of the Bengal Congress Volunteers. His activities led to his imprisonment in December 1921. In 1924 he was appointed Chief Executive Officer of the Calcutta Municipal Corporation, with Das as mayor. Bose was soon after deported to Burma, Myanmar, because he was suspected of connections with secret revolutionary movements. Released in 1927, he returned to find Bengal Congress affairs in disarray after the death of Das, and Bose was elected president of the Bengal Congress. Shortly thereafter he and Jawaharlal Nehru became the two general secretaries of the Indian National Congress. Together they represented the more militant, left-wing faction of the party against the more compromising, right-wing Gandhian faction. Vocal support for Gandhi increased within the Indian National Congress, meanwhile, and, in light of this, Gandhi resumed a more commanding role in the party. When the civil disobedience movement was started in 1930, Bose was already in detention for his associations with an underground revolutionary group, the Bengal Volunteers. Nevertheless, he was elected mayor of Calcutta while in prison. Released and then rearrested several times for his suspected role in violent acts, Bose was finally allowed to proceed to Europe after he contracted tuberculosis and was released for ill health. In enforced exile and still ill, he wrote The Indian Struggle, 1920 to 1934, and pleaded India's cause with European leaders. He returned from Europe in 1936, was again taken into custody, and was released after a year. Meanwhile, Bose became increasingly critical of Gandhi's more conservative economics as well as his less confrontational approach toward independence. In 1938, he was elected president of the Indian National Congress and formed a national planning committee, which formulated a policy of broad industrialization. However, this did not harmonize with Gandhian economic thought, which clung to the notion of cottage industries and benefiting from the use of the country's own resources. Bose's vindication came in 1939 when he defeated a Gandhian rival for re-election. Nonetheless, the rebel president felt bound to resign because of the lack of Gandhi's support. He founded the Forward Bloc, hoping to rally radical elements, but was again incarcerated in July 1940. His refusal to remain in prison at this critical period of India's history was expressed in a determination to fast to death, which frightened the British government into releasing him. On 26 January 1941, though closely watched, he escaped from his Calcutta residence in disguise and, traveling via Kabul and Moscow, eventually reached Germany in April. In Nazi Germany, Bose came under the tutelage of a newly created Special Bureau for India, guided by Adam von Trott-Zusolz. He and other Indians who had gathered in Berlin made regular broadcasts from the German-sponsored Azad Hind radio beginning in January 1942, speaking in English, Hindi, Bengali, Tamil, Telugu, Gujarati, and Pashto. A little more than a year after the Japanese invasion of Southeast Asia, Bose left Germany, traveling by German and Japanese submarines and by plane, and arrived in May 1943 in Tokyo. On 4th July he assumed leadership of the Indian independence movement in East Asia and proceeded, with Japanese aid and influence, to form a trained army of about 40,000 troops in Japanese-occupied Southeast Asia. On 21 October 1943, Bose proclaimed the establishment of a provisional independent Indian government, and his so-called Indian National Army, Azad Hind Fauj, alongside Japanese troops, advanced to Rangoon, Yangon, and thence overland into India, reaching Indian soil on 18 March 1944, and moving into Kohima and the plains of Imphal. In a stubborn battle, the mixed Indian and Japanese forces, lacking Japanese air support, were defeated and forced to retreat. The Indian National Army nevertheless for some time succeeded in maintaining its identity as a liberation army, based in Burma and then Indochina. With the defeat of Japan, however, Bose's fortunes ended. 18 August 1945, death. In the consensus of scholarly opinion, Subhas Chandra Bose's death occurred from third-degree burns on 18 August 1945 after his overloaded Japanese plane crashed in Japanese-ruled Formosa, now Taiwan. However, many among his supporters, especially in Bengal, refused at the time, and have refused since, to believe either the fact or the circumstances of his death. Conspiracy theories appeared within hours of his death and have thereafter had a long shelf life, keeping alive various martial myths about Bose. In Taihoku, at around 2:30 p.m. as the bomber with Bose on board was leaving the standard path taken by aircraft during takeoff, the passengers inside heard a loud sound, similar to an engine backfiring. The mechanics on the tarmac saw something fall out of the plane. It was the portside engine, or a part of it, and the propeller. The plane swung wildly to the right and plummeted, crashing, breaking into two, and exploding into flames. Inside, the chief pilot, co-pilot, and Lieutenant General Sunamsa Shide, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Japanese Kuomintang Army, who was to have made the negotiations for Bose with the Soviet Army in Manchuria, were instantly killed. Bose's assistant Habibur Rahman was stunned, passing out briefly, and Bose, although conscious and not fatally hurt, was soaked in gasoline. When Rahman came to, he and Bose attempted to leave by the rear door, but found it blocked by the luggage. They then decided to run through the flames and exit from the front. The ground staff, now approaching the plane, saw two people staggering towards them, one of whom had become a human torch. The human torch turned out to be Bose, whose gasoline-soaked clothes had instantly ignited. Rahman and a few others managed to smother the flames, but also noticed that Bose's face and head appeared badly burned. According to Joyce Chapman Lebra, a truck which served as ambulance rushed Bose and the other passengers to the Nunmo Military Hospital south of Taihoku. The airport personnel called Dr. Taneyoshi Yoshimi, the surgeon in charge, at the hospital at around 3 p.m. Bose was conscious and mostly coherent when they reached the hospital, and for some time thereafter. Bose was naked, except for a blanket wrapped around him, and Dr. Yoshimi immediately saw evidence of third-degree burns on many parts of the body, especially on his chest, doubting very much that he would live. Dr. Yoshimi promptly began to treat Bose and was assisted by Dr. Tsuta. According to historian Leonard A. Gordon, who interviewed all the hospital personnel later, a disinfectant, Rivamol, was put over most of his body, and then a white ointment was applied and he was bandaged over most of his body. Dr. Yoshimi gave Bose 4 injections of Vita Camphor and 2 of digitamine for his weakened heart. These were given about every 30 minutes. Since his body had lost fluids quickly upon being burnt, he was also given Ringer solution intravenously. A third doctor, Dr. Ishii, gave him a blood transfusion. An orderly, Kazumitsui, an army private, was in the room and several nurses were also assisting. Bose still had a clear head, which Dr. Yoshimi found remarkable for someone with such severe injuries. Soon, in spite of the treatment, Bose went into a coma. A few hours later, between 9 and 10 p.m. local time, on Saturday 18 August 1945, Bose died aged 48. Ideology. Subhas Chandra Bose believed that the Bhagavad Gita was a great source of inspiration for the struggle against the British. His nationalist thoughts and his emphasis on social service and reform had all inspired Subhas Chandra Bose from his very young days. Bose had clearly expressed his belief that democracy was the best option for India. However, during the war, and possibly as early as the 1930s, Bose seems to have decided that no democratic system could be adequate to overcome India's poverty and social inequalities, and he wrote that a socialist state similar to that of Soviet Russia, which he had also seen and admired, would be needed for the process of national rebuilding. Accordingly, some suggest that Bose's alliance with the Axis during the war was based on more than just pragmatism, and that Bose was a militant nationalist, though not a Nazi nor a fascist, for he supported the empowerment of women, secularism, and other liberal ideas. Alternatively, others consider he might have been using populist methods of mobilization common to many post-colonial leaders.